want a pet. What kind of pet should we get? But you know what Kay did? Do you know what she did? She said, fish! 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 It may be a fish is the pet we wish. Yes, in case you aren't aware, this is the book Beard. I'm keeping this on while I'm working on the new book, so it comes off when the new book is done, and until that time, I decided to grow a beard. I don't know, I figure every fantasy author grows a beard at one point or another, even the women, though they don't tell you about it. So I'm looking a little different than most days. Anyway, as long as I'm up here, do you guys have any questions or... Yes?
Would you have kept self-publishing if you weren't discovered?
Would I have kept self-publishing? Possibly. Self-publishing was successful for me, but it was a lot of work, and if I were to have continued with it, my family and I probably would have had to handle things differently after Eragon, because there was no way we could have maintained that level of effort and work and promotion and events while still having time to write and work on the next few books. So, plus, there weren't a lot of the self-publishing options available then that are now. You know, the ebook readers weren't around, the iPad wasn't around, Amazon was not as big as it is now. So, if you're looking at self-publishing, I'd say go for it. Just be careful, don't sign any contracts without reading them first. In my case, having a publisher has been very helpful, but I also don't think I would have gotten the publisher I did if I hadn't gone through that self-publishing experience. Yes?
First of all, thank you. I read all of your books, loved them.
Thank you.
And I was wondering if you have a routine with your writing. Like, do you have a time that you set aside daily, or just go with...
Yes. I don't believe in inspiration when it comes to writing. I mean, I've had inspiration. I'm always happy when it occurs, but it only occurs about once every blue moon. In any case, to me, it's a job. It's a job I enjoy, but I treat it like the same way I would if I were playing a musical instrument or building a house or anything. I try to be consistent at it. So I get up, I get my breakfast, I read the entire internet, and then or try to, and then I work. And I usually work for the majority of the middle of the day, and then I stop to, move, spend time with my family, play games, do something else to get my mind off the writing, and then I often write in the evenings after dinner as well. And that's pretty much my life. Weekends, holidays, birthdays, Christmas, you name it. So maybe I'll take Christmas off. But part of it is I'm not the fastest of writers, so I have to be consistent if I'm going to write something as big as these books. And I also put a lot of effort into developing the world and the story, and that's something that I've tried to shortcut it. I've tried to say, you know what, I got a great story idea, I'm just going to sit down and write it, and I'm not going to spend a year developing it. Doesn't work. At least not for me. I'm not that kind of a writer. So it takes time, and I try to put it in. Yes?
I have a question. Because obviously your books are very, very popular, and you kind of watch as some of these really big kind of fandom, almost cult following type groups gets to the point where the author almost loses control of his creation. I think George Lucas and Star Wars is an example of that. Do you feel that it is still your, or do you feel like it's kind of evolved from beyond that?
I think at the moment it still feels like mine to a degree. I think it would... I mean, that's a very interesting... That's a great question. No one's actually ever asked me that before. I think two things would make it evolve out of my control, if you will.
Yeah.
One would be if the series had been longer, and it had just kept growing and growing in momentum and size. There's a possibility that after a certain point, like with Game of Thrones, with those books, where as much as everyone may love what George R.R. Martin is doing at times, it's kind of beyond him at this point, especially with the television show. The other part would be if the film franchise had taken off, that really would have taken it to another level. And, and who knows, that may still happen someday. Yes?
So the next...
Great beard.
Thank you. The next book that you're working on is also going to be taking place in Algasia, right?
Actually, no. Next book I'm working on is science fiction. So aliens and spaceships and lasers and explosions and lots of fun stuff. And I'm getting really close to the end, so. I do plan on returning to the world of Eragon at some point and writing a 5th book. Since, as you may have noticed, I left lots of questions unanswered. But I needed a break after the Inheritance Cycle, so the sci-fi book is my break. And I spent like a year and a half, 2 years almost, developing this universe for the sci-fi book, which encompasses the real world as well as the future and 10,000 years back in the past. And it allows me that whenever I ever want to write a book set in the real world, I have this setting that's never going to go away. Whereas Algasia, it only really works for the fantasy stories, which is wonderful, and I plan on continuing to use that for the rest of my life, but it is limited to that specific genre, if you will. So this way I can write some, you know, romance historical novel, and yet it still ties into my sci-fi novel. If I write a romance novel, you know. I should. I really should. With dragons. Oh, wait, didn't I do that?
Yes, you did.
A little bit. A little bit. Yes?
Venturing into science fiction, are there any authors that influenced you there, particularly from the science fiction genre?
Yes. Octavia Butler, who wrote Wild Seed. Dune, of course. Heinlein, Asimov, Clarke, Ray Bradbury. I don't want to say too much about the new book, but it's sort of my attempt to write a love letter to this genre of science fiction in the same way that Eragon was a love letter to fantasy. Hyperion by Dan Simmons. That's another one I enjoyed growing up. So, to me, sci-fi is it's the genre of the future. You know, it's the stories of the future. And the thing is our everyday lives are looking more and more like science fiction. So, it's a lot more, I don't want to say interesting than fantasy, but it's a lot more exciting in some ways to speculate about where we might go or how we might end up. Although I have to admit, I really miss writing about dragons. You know, that's just, there's something about... Spoilers! Yes.
Do you think being homeschooled helped you at all in being an author?
Was being homeschooled helpful to me?
Yes.
Yes. Not for a host of reasons, but mainly because going through high school at my own pace allowed me to graduate early, and as a result I was able to have the time to write, which, you know, you can certainly write a book while you're in school, but it's a lot easier if you're not having to spend the bulk of your day going to classes, and at least that was my experience. So, and it allowed me to pursue my own interests in a way that worked well for my brain. And it taught me how to teach myself, and that's something I've continued to do to this day. So, any other questions here, or yes?
Make 10 books of Eragon.
Make 10 books of Eragon. Well, I'll think about it, okay? I do have a whole bunch of them planned out. You just want me to keep going with Eragon forever,
yes.
Right? I'll tell you one thing though. When I started writing Eragon, one thing I really wanted to do was I wanted the story to have an end. Because a lot of books, and especially fantasy stories, go on and on and on and on and on and on. And when I started writing Eragon, I thought, if it's a good story, it has to have an end. So there will be future books with Eragon, but they'll always have an end. And they'll always leave you asking more questions. Yes?
So you started out really at like a really young age. So how do you deal with that as a young writer, deciding it's time for me to show my work, even though I'm still a teenager, essentially?
Oy. When do you decide when to show your work to people? Basically, you have a certain amount of time, energy, and skill, okay? We all do. And you have to think of it like money, in some ways, or water. You have a certain amount, and you can pour a certain amount into the book. And at a certain point, you can't pour any more in. Maybe because your skill means you can't make the book any better. Maybe because you don't have any more time. Maybe because you really want to be moving on and doing something else. At a certain point, you can't make that book any better, and you might actually be making it worse if you keep grinding away on it. At that point, that's when you show it to people. And you might still think it's horrible. You might be sitting there with this twisted, knotted feeling in your stomach saying, I can't show this to anyone, they're going to think it's horrible, they're going to say bad things about it, and you know what? They might. But that's how you learn, that's how you grow, and you're writing, if you're not writing for an audience, then you're engaging in, well, you're engaging in mental acrobatics that are of no use to anyone except for perhaps yourself. And if you want to be communicating to others, you have to share it at some point. And I personally, I've learned more from editing than I ever have from actually writing. Just like there's a reason why every single singer, like professional singer, even if they're like heavy metal singers, they go to voice coaches. Because you can't hear when you're hitting the wrong notes or if you're doing things you shouldn't be doing with your voice. And writing is very, very similar. Unless you happen to be Shakespeare or someone of that caliber. Unless you can write perfect prose the first time through, and even Shakespeare didn't write perfect prose the first time through, you really need to have feedback, and then you learn from the feedback, and then you get over it. The other thing is, if people enjoy reading your books, and you sell books, or you're able to get a writing contract, is you just don't listen to the naysayers. Because you can't please everyone all the time. Lots of people hate Shakespeare, right? Or Austen, or Dickens, or whomever, or Paolini, or Stephanie Meyer, or the list goes on and on. So if you have, as Stephen King once said, this isn't the yardstick by which you measure all art, but it works if you want to be a professional artist. He said, "How do you know if you're a successful writer? Did the check clear? All right, congratulations, you're a successful writer." So that's one answer. That's one answer. And another thing is just taking that leap and jumping off the cliff and going for it, just like with everything else in life. So.